welcome to another Thinking in Circles lecture series. Today we're going to be talking about the Daemon, what it is, the Visitation itself, and sleep paralysis, and the platform it provides you for the rest of your life. And just a quick overview on exactly what we're going to get into. I'm going to talk about my personal encounter with the visual aspect of the shadow and also the light that was received as a vision as well, though, too, because I actually received the opposite vision, which is something that we're going to get into. We're going to talk about the Jungian analytic psych terminology, the tree of life in respect to this terminology. We're also going to take a look into the impulses as the manifestation within of the Daemon and its links to fate and destiny. We're also going to take a look at the anima and animus as they link to fate and destiny, and as they can in fact be the form of the Daemon that it will basically take in order to convey the message of the self to your psyche, and how this vision can be compensatory to our state of not knowing and of deficiency, because not knowing is the deficiency. Anyways, we're also going to be talking about the conscience and its superegoic role, and how it may contribute to the creation of the shadow layer in the psyche, and how the conscience can possibly be a relayer of higher information. For example, this is why you probably should cooperate and trust your gut's hunches. You may be being led in the right direction and not just simply be receiving a message to conform to X, Y, or Z, right? We're going to go into a quick note on the Freudian id as it pertains to this study. We're also going to go into the story of St. George and the dragon related to the shadow and the proper attitude towards the shadow, and a direct allusion to where the shadow functions or where it basically figuratively lives within the triune brain model. We're going to go into Freudian sublimation of the id as a wise step towards calming the old serpent, the dragon, thus making progress into the work upon the shadow. And we're also going to go into a direct look at the Daemon, shadow spirits, which I believe are synonymous, and some of their collective folklore. We're going to also get into the shadow and the prima materia of alchemy, as those are synonymous as well. So without any further ado, let's get into the subject matter. So a foreword about the terminology I'll be using: shadow person, night visitor, mare, Mara, etc. And I'll let you kind of know when we get to the etceteras, referred to the Daemon in its initial dark form. And like as I said earlier, we're going to go into a quick review of the analytic psychology terminology. That way we don't get lost, because this one kind of gets a little bit deep. And we're going to get into an initial introduction to the Jungian map of the psyche and some of the terms therein. And this Jungian map of the psyche is the one Carl Gustav Jung put out. And we're also going to look at the tree of life, the Jungian map of the psyche on the tree of life that Eva Ryder put together, who is an analytic psychologist that does a lot of work that I've enjoyed taking a look at myself. And so let's continue. So we're going to talk about the key components of Jung's idea of the psyche. All right. So to Jung, the ego was the center of the field of consciousness, and it was the part of the psyche where conscious awareness resides, our sense of identity and existence. It organizes our thoughts, feelings, senses, and intuition, and regulates access to memory. It is the part that links the inner and outer worlds together, forming how we relate to that which is external to us. For example, the point of perception and senses as pertains to our inner and outer world. The personal unconscious arises from the interaction between the collective unconscious and one's own personal growth. Complexes are themed organizations in the unconscious mind centering around patterns of memories, emotions, perceptions, and wishes, patterns that are formed by experience and by an individual's reactions to that experience. They behave in a rather automatic manner and can lead to a person feeling like the behavior that arises from them is out of their control. Complexes are strongly influenced by the collective unconscious. That's very important, and tend to have an archetypal element. In a healthy individual, complexes are seldom a problem, and they're the key to balancing the rather one-sided views of the ego so that development can occur. If a person is mentally ill, complexes may become overt and more of an issue. Now, the collective unconscious is the theory that all elements of an individual's nature are present from birth, and that the environment of the person brings them out rather than the environment creating them. Jung felt that people are born with a blueprint already in them that will determine the course of their lives, which is fairly widely supported today owing to the amount of evidence there is in the animal kingdom for various species born with a repertoire of behaviors uniquely adapted to their environments. These behaviors in animals are activated by environmental stimuli in the same manner that Jung felt human behaviors are brought to the fore. Also, the term archetype is an inherited mode of functioning corresponding to the inborn way in which the chick emerges from the egg, the bird builds its nest, a certain kind of wasp stings the motor ganglion of the caterpillar, and eels find their way to the Bermudas. It is a pattern of behavior, in other words. Jung believed that these blueprints are influenced strongly by various archetypes in our lives, such as our parents and other relatives, major events, births, deaths, etc., and archetypes originating in nature and in our cultures. Common symbolisms and elements like the moon, sun, water, fire, etc. All of these things come together to find expressions in the psyche and are frequently reflected in our stories and myths. Jung also felt there was an opposing spiritual polarity which greatly impacts the psyche. Now, the self, according to Jung, was the sum total of the psyche with all its potential included. The part of the psyche that looks forward, that contains the drive towards fulfillment and wholeness, is what the self is. Let me hit the next page up real quick. The self was said to drive the process of individuation, which is the quest of the individual to reach his or her fullest potential. Persona is an element of the personality which arises for reasons of adaptation or personal convenience. If you have certain masks you put on in various situations, such as the side of yourself you present at work or to family, that is a persona. And it can be seen as the public relations part of the ego that allows you to interact socially in a variety of situations with relative ease. Those who identify too strongly with their personas, however, can run into problems. And this can stunt someone's personal growth a great deal, as other aspects of the self then cannot properly develop, crippling overall growth. The persona usually grows from the parts of people that one wants to please, like such as teachers, parents, authority figures, etc. It leans heavily towards embodying one's own best qualities, leaving those negative traits which contradict the persona to form the shadow. The shadow are those traits that we dislike or would rather ignore come together to form what Jung called the shadow. This part of the psyche, which is also influenced heavily by the collective unconscious, is a form of complex, and it's most accessible by the conscious mind. Jung felt that where there is light, there must also be a shadow, which is to say that the shadow has an important role to play in balancing the overall psyche. Without a well-developed shadow side, a person can easily become shallow and extremely preoccupied with the opinions of others. Light and dark are necessary to our personal growth. Jung believed that not wanting to look at their shadows directly, many people project them onto others, meaning that the qualities we often cannot stand in others, we have in ourselves and wish not to see. To truly grow as a person, one must see such willful blindness to one's shadow and attempt to balance it with the persona. And keep in mind, like it was saying earlier, the persona can kind of give you keys into basically how you're playing so much into keeping up with the views of others. You know what I mean? And that's what creates the shadow, because you can't live up to everybody's expectations all of the time. You're basically gonna neglect yourself at the end of the day. You know what I mean? And a lot of times, other people's ideas of what's right or wrong or this or that, it's gonna cast certain permanent taint on the way that you look at things. And the thing is a lot of times judgments that you make, they're not really even your own. You're basically desiring things the way somebody else desires them. Anyways, anima and animus are the contrasexual archetypes of the psyche, with the anima being in man and animus in a woman, and are built from the feminine and masculine archetypes the individual experiences, as well as experience with members of the opposite sex, beginning with a parent, and seek to balance out one's otherwise possible one-sided experience of a gender. These archetypes tend to wind up being projected in a more idealized form. One looks for the reflection of one's anima or animus in a potential mate, accounting for the phenomenon of love at first sight. Jung saw masculinity or femininity as merely two halves of a whole, such as light and shadow halves, which ought to serve to balance one another out. So he was way ahead of his time, though, on his whole ideas of sexuality, right? So now recapitulating, because I have some notes in the sections where it was talking about complexes and the collective unconscious, right? Directly pertaining to what we are talking about in this lecture. The phenomenon of visually seeing the daemon or shadow spirit in its unresolved form of darkness could be the evidence of an archetypal complex that needs conscious resolution. It is my view that seeing it is evidence of the Jungian shadow given visible form. The series of negative emotions we feel when we do see the apparition, the words it may say, and the actions it seems to perform upon our bodies, if named, corresponds quite uniformly to the negative ways we have felt about our own person, traumas we have been through that we have struggled to forget, and in attempt to do so have repressed, and through repression have split off, and having split off have been given license for such a being who is a part of us, our psyche, to materialize. So because we repress a lot of these things, repression is the cause of a split off, is the cause of the shadow. And the thing is what I'm saying here is that the shadow person, the shadow spirit, if you will, the visible entity, is most likely that split off of the shadow that we're actually seeing. So Jung stated in one of his books, Edward F. Edinger reprinted this in Transformations of the Libido, and I found it very pertinent to recapitulate part of it here, that the god appears at first in hostile form as an assailant with whom the hero has to wrestle. This is in keeping with the violence of all unconscious dynamism. The struggle has its parallel in Jacob's wrestling with the angel at the ford Jabbok, after which he received blessing and favor. That part, after which he received blessing and favor, was my addition because I didn't want to cite the whole thing because we got a lot to read here. All right. So pertaining to the portion that talks about the persona, I wrote a quick note here, and I put, this shadow entity made visible during that moment of visitation is clearly under the lens of this descriptive terminology, a mask or veil embodying all the negatively charged information which belongs to the viewer himself or herself. All bodies or shells contain some sort of animating principle. The animating principle of the shadow entity is, I will venture as far to say, an inverted image of the totality of perfection. It is the embodiment of mine even, negative traits, which you repress, and so had I, which is why I saw it. The fact that the shadow is influenced heavily by the collective unconscious means here that the shape it takes and actions it produces upon the viewer and experiencer comprise, if decoded and understood properly, a roadmap that one will follow towards the resolution and integration of the root of the inner conflict which caused the appearance of the vision of terror it has widely come to be known as. So, on the portion of individuation, which I just read at the last portion of this description of Jung's idea on the contents of the psyche, I wrote this short piece as a footnote. In dealing with the experience of the shadow person, the mare, the so-called incubi, and even Mara, who is also Yama, the god of death, as the archetype personifying the forces of darkness, who is the force in Buddhism that keeps the wheel of suffering spinning, constantly leading one into temptation and into desire, death, and rebirth, away from the goal of nirvana. In line with this form of psychological thought, away from individuation, balance, freedom from the clinging to one side or the other of polarity, dualism, which is fatalistic, it is important to note again that this is one angle of a two-sided coin which holds ultimate light on the opposing side of the menacing vision. For example, with Yama/Mara in mind and the wheel of life, Bhava Chakra, meaning the cycle of being/worldly existence, it is wise to note that it was upon learning from this cycle of ignorance, craving, rebirth, and suffering that Gautama Buddha, under the Bodhi tree, attained enlightenment, renouncing the illusions of life, which also could be perceived as another form of repression. Yet he attained light and decided to live as a wandering ascetic and beggar instead of staying in the life of luxury he was born into. A good movie to look at that depicts a great scene in which the archetype of the shadow spirit appears is the 1993 film Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. The battle between Lee and this shadow spirit was obviously a struggle with fate and ultimately destiny. And I believe anyone watching that portion of the film will pick up on the archetypal energy and meaning. And what I'll try to do is put part of that clip in this lecture under Creative Commons law use. I could possibly do it. I'm going to look into that because I don't really want any hits on this page, because I want to keep it open and be able to reach a lot of people with really interesting information, and that might cause some problems. So I might even leave a link to that portion of that clip in the description. That's possible as well too. So all right. So I'm also going to show the Jungian map of the psyche. I'm going to put that up on the screen here. That way you can take a look at what we just went over right now. And I'm going to give that a few seconds to roll by. And the next slide that I'm going to throw up is basically showing the map of the psyche on the Tree of Life. And that's Eva Ryder's diagram. I would suggest that you guys go and check out some of her information. I've been enriched to see that Jungian psychology lines up almost perfectly, really, with the Tree of Life. And she was amazed to even think that Jung might have had some knowledge of the Tree of Life, and it's impossible that he didn't. All the different traditions that he was studying and speaking upon as he was putting out a lot of his psychological theories. So we're gonna put that up, show you what that is, and I would direct your attention to the portion of the map that says archetypal world. That is the realm through which the spirit is goading us with symbology and everything else. And the thing is, though, is this is coming through the realms of the collective unconscious. It's showing up as anima or animus in our dream material, in our the materials in our dreams. But a lot of times, because we, especially in our society, we neglect to do the proper shadow work. What ends up happening is we see a lot of lower, more darker imagery in our dreams. We have nightmares, and even the word nightmare comes from the idea of the mare, which is what they called that spirit that shows up, that spirit or entity, the shadow spirit. That's what they referred to it as, the mare. That's where we get the word nightmare. You know what I mean? And the shadow is the nightmare that wreaks havoc on you in your day-to-day life through the projections, the things that you're putting off on everybody else, and ways that you feel you're better than everybody else, and that you'll live your life out of a complete illusion, you know. And all of this trickles down into the ego, which is the perceiver inside of your body and the regulator of your consciousness. In some ways, it's a smaller center than the self. And the thing is without doing that work and trying to attain an ego self link or ego self access without being made aware or waking up to that reality, I mean, we're kind of stuck. Where a lot of times we end up being the plaything of split offs that are created by the shadow, and really by our own willful shadow repression. You know what I mean? We're repressing things into the shadow through the persona, which is even in this map of the psyche on the tree of life. The persona is in between the body and the ego. You know what I mean? Or it's basically how you clothe your body, how you show yourself to the world. You know what I mean? But anyways, let's continue forward. Now we're going to talk about inner impulses as the will of God. A lot of this reading is going to come from collected works of Carl Gustav Jung, 9. And most of this here looks like paragraph 51. And I'm going to put emphasis on some of these underlying portions, and it really pertains to the idea of the daemon and the impulse that we receive from that entity, if you will. All right, so inner impulses is the will of God. When I say that the impulses which we find in ourselves should be understood as the will of God, I wish to emphasize that they ought not to be regarded as an arbitrary wishing and willing, but as absolutes which one must learn how to handle correctly. The will can control them, the impulses, only in part. It may be able to suppress them, but it cannot alter their nature, and what is suppressed comes up again in another place in altered form. And this is an underline, this last portion I'm going to read, but this time loaded with a resentment that makes the otherwise harmless natural impulse our enemy. That's the split off that I was talking about just earlier. I should also like the term God in the phrase the will of God to be understood not so much as in the Christian sense as in the sense intended by Diotima when she said Eros, dear Socrates, is a mighty daemon. And Eros, once again, is the god of love. This is also to keep in mind with this statement, Eros is the god that first, what did Eros create first before humanity, as the myth lays out? Eros created birds. And birds, I constantly show the slide with the bird descending in between the two individuals that represent the emergence of the opposites, and the bird is the one that is coming, or the spirit rather, that's coming to unite the conscious ego and the unconscious. You see what I'm saying? So that's something to think about, is that we're being goaded. The word I always use, we're being goaded by some hierarchical entities that are serving as a in-between, if you will, of manifestation to our ego, our egoic consciousness. They're basically using certain mental or spiritual forms to basically give us the message of the self in a large way. And sometimes the messenger can be downright, in within our moralistic understanding, think downright evil. This is an evil appearance, it's scary, it has a bunch of negative connotations and emotions around it. That's what it could be. But unity comes from strife and also love. It could be a being of love and of light as well, though, too. So continue it forward. The Greek words daemon and daemonian express a determining power which comes upon man from outside, like the dove, like I was saying, like providence or fate, through the ethical, though the ethical decision is left to man. So it's up to you what you do with the experience of goading from the transpersonal, is what that's basically saying. He must know, however, that he is deciding about what he is doing. Then if he obeys, he is following not just his own opinion. And if he rejects, he is destroying not just his own invention. So a lot of these impulses that you get, I urge most of you that are listening today to think, where did that come from? Did that really come from inside of me, or just my own mental voice speaking, my conscience? What is the conscience? We're going to get into that, though. But where did that actually come from? A lot of times there's things that are spoken to you that if you just take it in passe, what happens is you don't really see that a lot of times you're getting guidance and information and wisdom from a higher source, a source much higher than just your own split off egoic idea of this or that. All right, so now the next thing that we're going to look at is on female imagery in the dreams of man, which is called the anima, right? So, being that the soul is living being, soul is the living thing in man, that which lives of itself and causes life. Therefore, God breathed into Adam a living breath that he might live. And I put a footnote here that some words that are relative to the breath of life, and then also man being a living being, are neshama in Hebrew. The root being neshem. I'm going to put that up on the screen. Nefesh is one. And the word nefesh chaya. So that's a living being, a living body, or a living soul. You know what I mean? And the Semitic root is pe va shin, fush or push. You know what I mean? So we'll talk about these a little bit further in here. And when I put the Semitic roots up on this on this aspect of conversation right here, you'll know that we're talking about aspects of the anima here. All right. So now continuing on the situation with the anima, and this from Collected Works of Carl Gustav Jung, 9.1 paragraph 56 and 57 is what we're going to be reading off this page. With her cunning play of illusions, the anima, the soul, lures into life the inertness of matter that does not want to live. She makes us believe incredible things that life may be lived. She is full of snares and traps in order that man should fall, should reach the earth, entangle himself there, and stay caught, so that life should be lived. As even the Garden of Eden could not rest content until she had convinced Adam of the goodness of the forbidden apple. So she and this could refer to the lower levels of the anima. The lower levels of the anima, the lower two really are 10 temptress aspects. Eve, you have the next level up is Helen of Troy, or Venus for that matter. You could put there Aphrodite for that matter. You know what I mean? The higher levels correspond to better guides to the soul of man. All right. So were it not for the leaping and twinkling of the soul, and the root reference to the word leaping and twinkling of soul, and I believe Carl Jung just off of these little words that he put in here, because when you look into the Hebrew etymology on this, right, you'll see that leaping and twinkling of the soul, just the word that's written down here is expressed in the root. And fush, pe va shin, that Semitic root has leaping and twinkling of the soul there. And then we also have chaya that we could look at. I'll throw those up on the screen. Were it not for the leaping and twinkling of the soul, man would rot away in his greatest passion, idleness, laziness, right? A certain kind of reasonableness is its advocate, and a certain kind of morality adds its blessing. But to have soul is the whole venture of life, for soul is a life-giving Daemon is the word used, who plays his elfin game above and below human existence, for which reason the realm of dogma is threatened. For which reason in the realm of dogma he is threatened and propitiated with superhuman punishments and blessings that can go far beyond the possible deserts of human beings. So on to the next one here. Heaven and hell are the fates meted out to the soul and not to civilized man, who in his nakedness and timidity would have no idea of what to do with himself in a heavenly Jerusalem. And I underline heaven and hell are the fates, right? And I made this footnote. Remember the references to the wheel of life. Mara/Yama, besides being a shadow figure or likened to such, is also akin to the lower level of anima development, as we have read that on the lower level the anima is full of traps that can keep man earthbound and ensnared, because Mara basically keeps you through karma, through creating new karma, bad karma, you know, if you will, using the moralistic term bad, through creating negative karma, keeps you here for another stay in this beautiful life. You will reincarnate if you believe in reincarnation. That is from the Buddhist idea, okay, or the Hindu idea, if you will, as well too, we could say. All right. The anima is not the soul in the dogmatic sense, not an anima rationalis, so not the rational soul, which is a philosophical conception, but it is a natural archetype that satisfactorily sums up all the statements of the unconscious, of the primitive mind, of the history of language and religion. It is a factor in the proper sense of the word. Man cannot make it. On the contrary, it is always the a priori element in his moods, reactions, impulses, and whatever is spontaneous in psychic life. It is something that lives of itself and that makes us live. It is a life behind consciousness that cannot be completely integrated with it, but from which, on the contrary, consciousness arises. For in the last analysis, psychic life is for the greater part an unconscious life that surrounds consciousness on all sides, a notion that is sufficiently obvious when one considers how much unconscious preparation is needed, for instance, to register a sense impression. So, let's see. All right, so on male imagery in the dreams of women. So now we're going to talk about the animus and spirit in dreams. So the father complex in women is one of the places that we are going to touch on, and this from Collected Works 9.1 of Carl Gustav Jung, paragraph 396 is where this comes from. So the father complex in women. In women, the father complex induces the liveliest spiritual aspirations and interests. So we're also going to look at wise old man symbolizes the spiritual factor. In dreams, it is always the father figure for whom the decisive convictions, prohibitions, and wise counsels emanate. The invisibility of this source is frequently emphasized by the fact that it consists simply of an authoritative voice which passes final judgments. Mostly, therefore, it is the figure of a wise old man who symbolizes the spiritual factor. Part played by the real spirit. Sometimes the part is played by a real spirit, namely the ghost of one dead, or more rarely by grotesque gnome-like figures or talking animals. The dwarf forms are found, at least in my experience, mainly in women. And so in Jung's clinical experience, like dwarfs, gnome-like figures and stuff like that. Those are usually found in women's dreams as the real spirit being shown to them as basically as the animus. You know what I mean? And the animus is a logoic principle within the woman. The anima plays the eros principle in a man's psyche and shows up as a woman. All right, so spirit can take part with her cunning play of hold on, let me. Spirit can take part of boy or youth, can take the form of boy or youth. All right, so in both sexes, male and female, the spirit can also take the form of a boy or youth. Spirit in woman corresponds to the positive animus. In women, the spirit corresponds to the so-called positive animus, who indicates the possibility of conscious spiritual effort. In men, his spirit meaning is not so simple. He can be positive, in which case he signifies the higher personality, the self, or filius regius. So that's like I guess the son of the king, filius regius, as conceived by the alchemist. But he can also be negative, and then he signifies the infantile shadow. In both cases, the boy means some form of spirit. Graybeard and boy belong together. The pair of them play a considerable role in alchemy as symbols of Mercury, the author and finisher of the alchemical work, right? Grand plan on which the unconscious life of the psyche is constructed. It can never be established with 100% certainty whether the spirit figures in dreams are morally good. We were talking about that earlier. Very often they show all the signs of duplicity, if not outright malice. I must emphasize, however, that the grand plan on which the unconscious life of the psyche is constructed is so inaccessible to our understanding that we can never know what evil may not be necessary in order to produce good by enantiodromia. And I wrote a footnote about enantiodromia, which is like basically the tendency for things to change into their opposites. So enantiodromia is Greek for running in opposite ways, and is the tendency of things to change into their opposites, especially as a supposed governing principle of natural cycles and of psychological development. The visual encounter of the shadow spirit, if taken up consciously as something to be understood seriously as a process or part of the process of individuation, heralding inner work that needs to be done, which I believe on the onset of such a sighting is what is being conveyed to the psyche, will be the beginning of one such enantiodromatic situation of the most meaningful kind. And I really mean that. That's why I'm putting this talk together, because if you get something from this, and if you get something from basically what I'm going to talk about on maybe even how to do some work to bring out some of the ideas of what you've experienced, because I for 100% fact, somebody who's going to watch this video has had the experience, and having that experience I think is one of the most important things, because we're aware of the shadow through the persona. We're aware of the shadow itself through a lot of the things that we put off on others. You know what I mean? We're aware of the shadow because of our projections, because of the darkness that we have within ourselves that we're aware of. We're aware of it, okay? And the thing is to have a visual image of this. Now you cannot say that you have no knowledge of it. It's something that you need to pay attention to, because even the complex that's formed from going through this type of situation of repression has an archetypal root, meaning that the self is trying to speak to you through a dark form. That's basically how I look at it, all right? So I'm going to throw up some Semitic roots that will elucidate the word enantiodromia, but the word that I'm going to refer to is the word rebound, and it's saled is the Hebrew root, and it basically, if you look into Sefer Sephiroth, the number is 94 on the gematria, right? And the magical power or force of 94 equals the number 105, which has the idea of subverting, ruining, and or changing. Also, it has the idea as a force of desire in the physical body, because the desire is constantly changing. Desire is constantly changing. You love somebody one day, you hate them the next. You know what I mean? And separation leads to reuniting. Reuniting leads to separation. It's the back and forth, the side by side. One day, or the back and forth basically is what Jung stated about, being tossed between opposites leads to an experience of things being side by side. You're basically seeing two centers inside of the one center, the body, if you will. All right. Anyways, we're going to get to the next page. So moving along. The figure of the wise old man can appear so plastically, not only in dreams, but also in visionary meditation, or what we call active imagination, that, as is sometimes apparently the case in India, it takes over the role of a guru. So through active imagination, and it's really more of a consciously driven attitude towards daydreaming, if you will, right? If you pay attention to these images, sometimes you might have an image of a wise old man that's giving you wisdom that could take the role of it could take the role right out of a guru's hands, right out of somebody that's giving you spiritual knowledge's hands. You know what I mean? And a lot of times they want you in their hands. The thing is you have the knowledge within you. You have it within you. You just need to know some of the key components to get into your own inner networks and to start interacting with some of these things. But anyways, continuing forward, the wise old man appears in dreams in the guise of a magician, doctor, priest, teacher, professor, grandfather, or any other person possessing authority. Archetype of spirit compensates a spiritual deficiency. The archetype of spirit in the shape of a man, hobgoblin, or animal always appears in a situation where insight, understanding, good advice, determination, planning, etc. are needed but cannot be mustered on one's own resources. The archetype compensates this state of spiritual deficiency by contents designed to fill the gap. And I put a little footnote here. Could it also then be conjectured from this line of reasoning then that the shadow spirit could appear to a person in order to make them directly aware of their repressions as a compensatory gesture from the psyche, or from the self through the psyche, right? Conscious. Now we're going to get to the idea of conscience. Is it just the voice of value judgment, right? The etymology of the word conscience tells us that it is a special form of knowledge or consciousness. Now, some of the Semitic roots for consciousness, or conscience rather, and one of the ones I think we're going to, actually, we'll approach both of them. Zepha, right, is one. Metzefun is another one. And Metzefun would be conscience or scruple. And I put in brackets here. It is a moral ideation, and that faculty, the imbalance and thus injustice of it, that creates the shadow aspect in us all. So it's an imbalance of moral ideation that leads to the creation of the shadow, the split offs, and everything else, and it's because you're not consciously taking it upon yourself to look and see what it is that's being told to you about what is in those what is in the conscious, what the conscious is trying to say to you, how it's trying to lead you, and to delineate whether it's just a voice from the blue that doesn't even matter, or whether it's something that needs the utmost attention. All right, so let us see here. Also levav, right, or lamed bet, right? This is a Semitic root for short. And then leba, it means heart, mind, conscience, center, middle, center. And as you saw on the Jungian map of the tree of life, that the self is communicating to the psyche via the center. It's coming straight down the center line of the tree of life. It's going straight down that middle pillar. You know what I mean? So that's something to think about, even in the etymology that's being laid out. So the peculiarity of conscious is that it is a knowledge of or uncertainty about the emotional value of ideas we have been concerning the motives of our actions. According to this definition, conscious is a complex phenomenon consisting on the one hand in an elementary act of the will or in an impulse to act for which no conscious reason can be given, and on the other hand in a judgment grounded on rational feeling. This judgment is a value judgment, and it differs from an intellectual judgment in that besides having an objective, general, and impartial character, it reveals the subjective point of reference. A value judgment always implicates the subject, presupposing that something is good or beautiful for me. So I added a bracket here. This portion I might add, just to let you know why I'm getting into this whole idea here. This portion I might add is referenced in order to deeper look at the superego, which I personally believe is the reason for most repression within the shadow, especially in the fact that its function is exacerbated almost unconsciously due to the shadow of the past years of patriarchal religious institutions and their rule sets, which completely contradict nature, both human and animal, because of its mandates of enslaving it, the human being, right, to purely moralistic and social laws. And foolishly, in our supposed liberal and free society, we believe we have escaped those mandates, which are being silently but effectively enforced by the superegoic structure within our psyches. That meaning, in short, that we think in this day and age that we're so free, that we've escaped the whole slew of what the patriarchy has done through the first church. And I'm not saying anything negative. I have a great respect for the symbology of all religions and the inner meaning, the meanings of the symbology that have the energy that affect the psyche, right? I'm looking a little bit deeper on religions, but as far as religion as a moral and society guiding structure, I believe that as long as people are not hurting one another, they should be able to live their own lives, you know? And I believe that in this day and age, we think that we've gotten away from the morals and dogmas of the church, but the thing is Western religion period is in the back of our psyches. We think we've gotten rid of it, but you could ask anybody, oh, do you know about Jesus Christ? Everybody that you ask, yeah, I know about Jesus. Yeah, but who doesn't know about Jesus? You know what I'm saying? So the thing is maybe their knowledge of those things are limited, but they know about the cross. They know about baptism. They know about the Holy Spirit. They know about the Holy Spirit and the dove possibly being linked symbolisms. If they have seen it and they don't directly know it, their unconscious knows what the meaning of those symbols are. And whether they know the meaning or not, they're under the effect of these things, because the unconscious is always seeing the bigger picture and trickling down information to the left hemisphere, the analytic hemisphere of the mind, and it's just getting bits and pieces that it can use in the world based upon that whole picture that the unconscious is seeing. So anyways, conscious is made up of two layers. If on the other hand I say that it is good or beautiful for certain other people, that is not necessarily a value judgment, but may just as well be an intellectual statement of fact. Conscious, therefore, is made up of two layers, the lower one comprising a particular psychic event, while the upper one is a kind of superstructure representing the positive or negative judgment of the subject. And that is from Collective Works 10, paragraph 825, all I've read there. So, for example, a businessman I knew, and this is Jung talking about one of his clients. Okay, For example, a businessman I knew was made what looked like a perfectly serious and an honorable offer, which it turned out much later would have involved him in a disastrous fraud had he accepted it. The following night after he received this offer, which, as I say, seemed to him quite acceptable, he dreamt that his hands and forearms were covered with black dirt, and I underline that because I'm going to go back to it. He could see no connection with the events of the previous day because he was unable to admit to himself that the offer had touched him on the vulnerable spot. His expectations of a good business deal. He was vulnerable there. He was looking at, just like we all do, what the payoff, and not looking at the negative downside of what it is that, and we'll repress it on the fly. Like, no, I see the payoff is the money and the good things that I'm going to be able to receive and achieve off of what I'm going to do, but maybe it's not the best thing to do. And his conscience acted as a compensatory, through the conscience, we could probably say there was some compensatory dream that came to him to let him know something different, right? So, he could see no connection with the events of the previous day because he was unable to admit to himself that the offer had touched him on the vulnerable spot. His expectations of a good business deal. I warned him about this, and he was careful enough to take certain precautions, which did in fact save him from more serious harm. Now, I wrote something about this situation that we're just talking about, the conscience and its dual upper and lower structure and this dream, right? Looking at the conscience and its dual upper and lower structure, one comprising a psychic event, the other being the superstructure that judges a subject. Keeping this in mind, while looking at the dream material, this man was indeed on the working end of both upper and lower structures of the conscience while in the dream state. The images of mud, dirt, slime, shit, mire, and ooze are coagulatio imagery. Coagulatio, I'm gonna throw the Rosarium Philosophorum stele up, or picture up rather, of what coagulatio is. Much like the Solutio dream imagery is what the coagulatio dream imagery is like. It's much like it, but more solidified on account of the medium in the dream, dirt as opposed to water. The dreamer would have had a physical situation on his hands to deal with, as these types of dreams manifest reality in the physical world. This leads to the speculation that the serpentine reptilian center in the brain may have something to do with dreams of this nature as well, as that very center is responsible for sending intuitive hunches, messages that forewarn to the emotional center, mammalian brain, to be rationally dealt with by the neocortex, not to mention the bodily cues of discomfort which usually accompany the the scent premonitions of sort, right? So let me see. Let me go to page 11 real quick because there's a note to read something. Okay, so we have already touched that. So the unconscious as the id, referenced because of the idea of canalization of libido, which would amount to non-repressing or decompressing of shadow aspects, which needs to be lived out or integrated in order to reach higher levels of the psyche. So we're going to talk about Freud's idea of the id. A lot of people know about it already, but for those that don't, it's really something important to get a pragmatic idea of what that is inside of oneself, and when you see it outside in the world of things amongst others or with others. All right, so Freud later expanded the concept of the unconscious by calling it the id, in contradistinction to the conscious ego. The term derives from Gradek, somebody named Gradek, probably a psychologist. The id represents the natural unconscious dynamism of man, while the ego forms that part of the id which is modified under the influence of the environment or is replaced by the reality principle. In working out the relations between the ego and the id, Freud discovered that the ego contains not only conscious but also unconscious contents, and he was therefore compelled to frame a concept to characterize the unconscious portion of the ego, which he called the superego or ego ideal. He regarded this as the representation of the parental authority as the successor of the Oedipus complex that impels the ego to restrain the id. And I wrote a little footnote here. Repression, sometimes for reasons of survival, sometimes in occurrence with a persona. It manifests itself as conscience, which, invested with the authority of collective morality, continues to display the character of the father. And I was talking about that earlier, about the priesthood, about the patriarchy. The superego accounts for the activity of the censor in dreams. And that is from Collected Works 18, paragraph 1152. So by now we should be slightly acquainted with how the shadow is created and fortified. One of my favorite legends will now be addressed in respect to it and how we should approach the shadow. This is really a good legend to look at, and it's mirrored in a lot of other hero myth legends. All right, and here we go. The shadow as the dragon of St. George. A great piece on how to approach it and how it should be understood. Instead of St. George, you could use the more general symbolism of Christ and the devil. St. George is a more personalistic formulation of the same. The saint is surely the conscious ego, but not the persona, because we don't assume that St. George is merely a mask hiding behind the real self. Persona is what you want to impress people with and what they force you to assume is a role. Therefore, it is called a mask. The sword, which you identify with the logos, is properly interpreted on the assumption that St. George symbolizes Christ, as no one else would be capable of wielding the logos. But if you take St. George as a human being, then it would be his discriminating faculty, and this is the main characteristic of consciousness, that is, discriminating chiefly by means of the intellect. Thus, the sword very often represents the intellect or discriminating values. That's the animus, all right? The dragon, in this case, would be the whole length of the shadow, namely the human plus the animal, ape, shadow, and man. And ape, while I was getting this material together, ape, the word kof in Hebrew is also representative of ape, and that actually stands for things. How do you say this? Impulses, things that are coming out of the unconscious, new forms, new growths. Also dream imagery, things that are just coming out of the blue into the dreamscape that on one end could be speaking of some super egoic ideal, and then on another end could be a lot of times speaking about some animalistic libido ideal as well, though, too. And that is pictured in the tarot card called the moon, which is not the real moon, actually, in the esoteric sense. So we're going to continue on. We like to imagine that God is all light, but S. Johannes Cruz has the truly psychological notion of the darkness and the seeming remoteness of God as an effect of the divine presence. This state of darkness is by far the most trying and most dangerous part of the mystical experiences. It feels like a void, and this is precisely what Buddhism cultivates as the most desirable state of nirvana. The Buddhists reach it in exactly the same way as the Christian mystics do, namely by excessive self-abnegation. At least this is true of classical Buddhism. It is not so true of its later developments, as for instance in Zen. On the portion speaking of, okay, so this is my footnote to this, right? On the portion speaking of individuation earlier in the lecture, I spoke of something very similar when talking about the site of suffering of Gautama Buddha the ones that he saw in his family's empire, which sites acted as the catalyst towards his deciding to give up worldly pleasure in order to go after enlightenment. So, continuing forward, it is generally true that consciousness must win a victory over the powers of darkness, but as darkness is not wholly subject to our moral evaluation, since it seems to be one of the divine characteristics, it remains a question whether the dragon is to be considered as wholly evil. And let's come back to this, because I have a footnote here that's very important. We can even see this fact that the more reptilian part of our consciousness will send us anxieties, fears, etc. in the face of real danger, and in the face of something that could be a great accomplishment as well. This center with its connotations and messages. Even so, the shadow spirit, which sends messages of the same kind, fear, anxiety, cessation of movement, i.e. the freeze response, should be viewed with understanding, a desire to understand and cooperate with the messages as something that can be transformative, right? So continuing forward, this question, however, is a most intricate one about the dragon being considered wholly evil. Is it? The serpent, as well as the dragon and other reptiles, usually symbolize those parts of the human psyche which are still connected with the animal side of man. The animal still lives in him. It is the old saurian that is really the dragon, and therefore the dragon is a very proper symbol. Something to think about. Something very, very big, something very, very amazing to think about. And to think about also too that, because the shadow was mentioned, right? Within the whole idea of hold on real quick, because I'm losing my train of thought here, of St. George and the Dragon. All right, it's really something important to think about, though, that the dragon may appear as the shape in the shape of a foe, but it may just be part of the unconscious way of compensating to allow our psyche to experience the self and experience a fuller life because of a renewed understanding of it. Okay, through the ideologies of especially here in the West, of Christianity, the devil, the serpent, it's evil, even people that are probably within earshot of hearing this, if and in most cases some are, that are not open enough to understand what it is that's being spoken here, you may look at what's being said like, oh, this is devil worship, and no, it is not. No, it is not. But also to remember what was spoken of earlier, that darkness, right? The shadow is created by a light, right? However great the darkness, on the opposite side of that, there's a great light as well too. So something to think about in terms of polarity, balance, and unity of opposites. All right, so anyways, these parts of the psyche are most intimately connected with the life of the body and cannot be missed if body and consciousness are to work together soundly. Therefore a certain amount or better an uncertain amount of darkness has to be allowed, because it is vitally necessary if the body or the mind is to live at all. Many neuroses come from the fact that too good a victory has been won over the body and its dark powers. Old Drummond, for instance, used to lament over the awful moods of pious people. Those were the cases where the old serpent has been too cruelly mauled by too spiritual a consciousness. One would have found in analyzing these people that there was no small amount of greed and vanity in their spiritual aspirations. The medical psychologist knows that he is treading on dangerous ground here, and therefore he goes warily when it comes to the question of victories over darkness. So getting in now to the Freudian theory of sublimation reference due to the daemon and need to find a way to express the will of God and to familiarize oneself with the term, right? So a theory which has nothing to do with the symbolism of alchemical sublimatio. According to Hinsey and Campbell's psychiatric dictionary, the term sublimation, as used in psychoanalysis, is defined as the process of modifying an instinctual impulse in such a way as to conform to the demands of society. Sublimation is a substitute activity which gives some measure of gratification to the infantile impulse which has been repudiated in its original form. Unlike usual defenses in sublimation, the ego is not acting in opposition to the id. On contrary, it is helping the id to gain external expression. Sublimation, in other words, does not involve repression. And that's kind of a tricky one to think about it. We're going to get into the idea of the daemon here right after I just say this, but it's like, and I talk about it sometimes too, you know, and they're talking about infantile impulses, right? The libido is like the fountain of youth within you, you know? And the thing is if it's repressed, you know, if your libido's repressed, I mean, it can basically go into a regression. You know what I mean? You can have your libido can go into a regression, and during that time, yeah, you're gonna have a lot of compensatory images such as mandala dreams. You're gonna have dreams that sometimes will take on a very archaic nature, and will. If you understand how to decode what they're saying, if you understand how to follow along with what they are conveying to you, you're gonna get a sense of something that's gonna show you a bigger way into maybe what it is you're calling in life, maybe what it is into how to canalize that libido correctly. But at the same time, though, too, is the libido, the energy that you see in children running free and carelessly without a care, you know, all that energy, you could say, could be, man, you could put these kids to work in a factory or whatever. That's what society would like to do in most cases. They don't want you to run free and live free like the quote unquote primitives do. They want to canalize it and put it into a way where it can generate some funds for some select individuals up somewhere high that feel they deserve it more than you do or whatever, right? So the thing is I think the idea of canalization, it's like, okay, if you've chosen this idea of canalization, and if a lot of times libido is that energy that you have that's pushing you, even through the push of the daemon, understanding what the daemon is showing you, your output is basically conformed to, and how you attach your psyche to certain things, which is basically what the libido is. Sometimes those are things that can be like, dude, that's not socially accepted to do this or to do that. I mean, that's kind of dark that you feel this way or that you think this way, you know what I mean? And a lot of times, once again, that leads to repression. That leads to that split off creation of the shadow. It has to live. It has to find a way to live itself out. You have to, one way that it was put, I think, by Edward F. Edinger, that you have to give, quote unquote, the devil his due. You have to, in going into the underworld in mythology, I think in Greek or Roman mythology, there was a dog named Cerberus that had, I think, like 3 heads or something. And like, you know, when you were going into hell, aka Hades, which is, you know, the realm of the libido, it's an unconscious thing. When all is said and done, you had to give it certain things, certain items, certain breads or certain meats or whatever in order to pass unsullied, you know what I mean? And in order to be able to come back out as well of the underworld if you were going in there to accomplish some task. So the thing is we have to do that with our own libido. We have to find a way to live out a lot of those things that are being repressed because of others' views, and because we're trying to live up to others' views. We have to find a way to live our truth, and that leads to a long life, and it leads to happiness. And if not a long life, at least you die happy. You know what I mean? But the explanation of what sublimation is in the Freudian ideology, it can kind of be taken as like, oh, so we're basically taking this libido energy, and we're canalizing it so that it goes with the demands of society. It kind of takes it down a super egoic way. Let me shut up. That was just some food for the thought, so you can look at some of the ideas here that I'm expressing, and then some of the ideas that were laid down of long time ago by the great psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud. Anyways, on to the Daemon information. Okay. Okay. So, Daemon means God, godlike, power, or fate. Remember Mara, remember Bhava Chakra, and how that is the wheel of fate in a large way, and how it deals with fate. Karma is the wheel of fortune, okay, in the tarot, key number 10. Originally referred to a lesser deity or guiding spirit, such as the daemons of ancient Greek religion and mythology, and of later Hellenistic religion, etc., etc. Daemon also has the idea of, in Proto-Indo-European, of provider or divider of fortunes or destinies, from the root star da, which means to divide. And you even see that old da, divide, right? And divide. Daemons were possibly seen as the souls of men of the Golden Age, acting as tutelary deities. Daemons are lesser divinities or spirits, often personifications of abstract concepts, beings of the same nature as both mortals and deities. A daemon is not so much a type of quasi-divine being according to an individual by the name of Burkert, but rather a non-personified peculiar mode of their activity. One tradition of Greek thought which found agreement in the mind of Plato was of a daemon which existed within a person from their birth, and that each individual was obtained by a singular daemon prior to their birth by way of lot, fate, or birthright. I subscribe to the idea of Plato on this a little bit more than some of the others that will be given. But anyways, continuing, Plato in Cratylus speculates that the word daemon is synonymous to daemon, knowing or wise. However, it is more probably deo, which is to divide, to distribute destinies, to allot. So now we're going to talk about Socrates. In Plato's Symposium, the priestess Diotima teaches Socrates that love is not a deity, but rather a great daemon. And also says everything demonic is between divine and mortal. And she describes daemons as interpreting and transporting human things to the gods and divine things to men. Entreaties and sacrifices from below, and ordinances and requitals from above. In Plato's Apology, okay, so I'm going to stop here because I'm going to read a footnote that I put based on what we're talking about here. This is also a Gnostic idea, nous, the serpent, being the one that transmutes the logoic symbols to man, who is a symbol below, and who receives the same symbols from man and transmutes them to the Father above. The diamond archetype of the self in Jung's Aeon expresses the same idea in its structure, because the serpent, which is Nous, sits pretty much dead center in the whole hierarchy of that system, which is, I found that it's kind of akin to the Tree of Life. I think at some point when I revisit it, I may turn around, because I'd seen that there were some juxtapositions with the Tree of Life as well, with the Daemon archetype of self of Carl Gustav Jung. So we'll get into that at some point here, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so a daemonian. Wait a minute. I skipped something. Sorry. Please bear with me. In Plato's Apology of Socrates, Socrates claimed to have a daemonian, literally a divine something, that frequently warned him in the form of a voice against mistakes, but never told him what to do. Socrates, however, never refers to the daemonian as a daemon. It was always referred to as an impersonal something or sign. By this term, he seems to indicate the true nature of the human soul, his newfound self-consciousness. That's something really big there. Burkert notes that a special being watches over each individual. A daemon who has obtained the person at birth by his lot is an idea which we find in Plato, undoubtedly from earlier tradition. Burkert states that in the Symposium, Plato has laid the foundation that would make it all but impossible to imagine the daemon in any other way with Eros, who is neither God nor mortal, but a mediator in between. And his metaphysical doctrine of an incorporeal, pure actuality, energia, identical to his performance, thinking of thinking, neosis, nocios, is the most blessed existence, the highest origin of everything. This is the God. On such a principle, heaven depends, and the cosmos. The highest, the best, is the one. But for the movement of the planets, a plurality of unmoved movers must further be assumed. So it's almost like to posit that there's something higher behind even that which moves us, which I 100% agree with. And the thing is a lot of people can't wrap their heads around that because they can't see past the veils of the shadow. They have not had any experience of the animal. They have not had any real eye-opening experiences of the self. And if they have, and they're just continuing to repress that, which I am pretty sure some people do in this society, because they think, oh, it's just a hallucination. I need to go see a psych and get on some meds. Yikes. Okay, so anyways, in Plato, there is an incipient tendency towards the apotheosis of nous. He needs a closeness and availability of the divine that is offered neither by the stars nor by metaphysical principles. Here a name emerged to fill a gap, a name which had always designated the incomprehensible yet present activity of a higher power, Daemon. All right. So let me see where I'm going with this. Okay, so I'm going to read this footnote before I get into the idea of repression and shadow spirits, and we will almost be home free on this reading. So now to touch on the direct knowledge, some of it anyways, of what the phenomenon of the shadow spirit is in the current generation of our time. I believe they are a collective conscious and archetypal experience, collective unconscious, I meant to say there, and archetypal experience, which places them in a remotely safe category for making an honest theory, as they are a widespread phenomenon that many have experienced, but few truly understand as anything more than a symptom of mental illness, sleep paralysis, sometimes even schizophrenia, etc. I personally have been investigating the importance of my very own exposure to this situation and believe it to be the Daemon. As with inner work on what it shows you about your own repressions, it will in time show you its opposite, which is a beautiful and positive light. And this light being is astoundingly its shadow, the shadow of the shadow being that was originally seen. Before this occurred for me, it represented a platform in my life that my actions followed, even unconsciously. Yet looking back, many of the choices I made, good ones too, were based upon the very pattern of the nature of the visitation I experienced and that visitor, right? This is why I will say it matches both descriptions, all right? So, sleep paralysis, we're going to talk about repression and shadow spirit. Sleep paralysis is a state during waking up or falling asleep in which a person is aware but unable to move or speak. During an episode, one may hallucinate, hear, feel, or see things that are not there. They say you're hallucinating, right? Which often results in fear. Episodes generally last less than a couple of minutes. It may recur as a single episode. The condition may occur in those who are otherwise healthy, or those with narcolepsy, or it may run in families as a result of specific genetic changes. The condition can be triggered by sleep deprivation, psychological stress, or abnormal sleep cycles. It's believed to involve a dysfunction in REM sleep and is commonly experienced by lucid dreamers. Some lucid dreamers use it as a method of having a dream. Other conditions that can present similarly in the situation include narcolepsy, atonic seizure, and hypokalemic periodic paralysis. Now check out these treatment options for this. Treatment options for sleep paralysis have been poorly studied. It is recommended that people be reassured that the condition is common and generally not serious. Other efforts that may be tried include sleep hygiene, cognitive behavioral therapy, and antidepressants. Wow, right? Wow. Between 8% and 50% of people experience sleep paralysis at some point in their life. About 5% of people have regular episodes. Males and females are affected equally. Sleep paralysis has been described throughout history. It is believed to have played a role in the creation of stories about alien abduction and other paranormal events. The main symptom of sleep paralysis is being unable to move or speak during awakening. It has also been known that one may feel pressure on their chest or intense pain in their head during an episode. Symptoms are usually accompanied by intense emotions such as fear or panic. And I wrote a little note on both of these, all right, about the pressure on the chest. The Semitic root, sheked, means to be awake, vigilant. Also, there are a few other things that it means. Guard, to be almond-shaped, which the word amygdala means. Furthermore, and in direct pertaining to the phenomenon of the shadow person, it means to tighten, press down, which hypothetically creates a link to the amygdala and the experience of the shadow person because of the word fear, because of the fear that one experiences during the situation. You know what I mean? Maybe the amygdala has a lot to do with the actual way that this being is able to materialize. Just a conjecture, okay? Now, on the experience, I mean, and that statement that I just made pertained mainly to feeling pressure on the chest, being pushed down, okay? Now talking about the stanza where it says, symptoms are usually accompanied by intense emotions such as fear and panic. This point makes me wonder if this phenomenon is somehow brought from the reptilian center in the brain. I would, even with my limited but growing knowledge, conjecture so, because the shadow is easier to apprehend knowledge of than the rest of the higher centers within the psyche. The fact that the shadow is influenced heavily by the collective unconscious, that the self is always making an attempt to bring us to higher levels of consciousness, and that it can appear in many ways in dreams, visions, and active imaginations, makes this an acceptable theory in my estimation. All right, and maybe yours, maybe you think so too. So let us continue. Sleep paralysis may include hypnagogic hallucinations, such as a stranger or dark figure in the room, supernatural creature suffocating or terrifying the individual, accompanied by a feeling of pressure on one's chest and difficulty breathing. They already said that earlier, but let's go again. Which once again seems like a direct experience of an archetypal entity, for example, a god or a demon, right? Several types of hallucination have been linked to sleep paralysis. The belief that there is an intruder in the room, the presence of an incubus. In sleep paralysis, the mechanisms which usually coordinate bodily movement, and we got another little note on this that's very important, and provide information on body position become activated, and because there is no actual movement, induce a floating sensation. The thalamus as a sensory relay center, here's my note here, receiving input from the cerebellum. The cortex and basal ganglia have to do with motor integration. And once again, the reptilian center of the brain is pointed at early on the outset of this experience of the night visitation by the shadow. The intruder and incubus hallucinations highly correlate with one another and moderately correlated with the third hallucination, vestibular motor disorientation, also known as out-of-body experiences, which differ from the other two, is that basically out-of-body experiences differ from the other situations in the visitation of fear and excessive emotion and everything, right? It does not involve the threat activated vigilant system. Now think about that Semitic root again, shaked, which most importantly means to be awake and vigilant in this situation, to tie down, tighten, press down. Think about that. All right. Continuing forward, and I wrote down here in a little side note, which system is an action of the reptilian brain, being the threat activated vigilance system. The original definition of sleep paralysis was codified by Samuel Johnson in his Dictionary of the English Language as nightmare, a term that evolved into our modern definition. And there's a star here, basically a footnote that I placed here. And even nightmares, just as much as the visual presence of the shadow in sleep paralysis, may have a redemptive power concealed within them if one can glean the meaning. The deficit one must work towards to rectify. Collected Works 12, paragraph 36, partially quoted. But we assiduously avoid investigating whether in this very power of evil God might have not placed some special purpose which it is most important for us to know. And that was Carl Gustav Jung in his Collective Works 12, paragraph 36. All right. So let me see here. Where are we at? Okay. Also, too, the words mayor, from Proto-Germanic meron, hence comes the word the mare in the word nightmare. And that it might also deal with the Greek Meron, and Meron is a character in the Odyssey, which I really think it's it would be pretty important. I don't know if maybe I can put some things up on the screen, which I might, about Meron in the Odyssey, because there's a lot codified about this situation of that night visitor, the shadow, in the situation with Meron in Odyssey. All right. And also Sanskrit Mara has to do with the word nightmare. All right. And with the mare, the being that visits you and pushes you down in the bed and says crazy stuff to you, makes you afraid. The boogeyman could very well even be part of this situation that has been an American idea that kids, they don't want to see the boogeyman. They're afraid of the boogeyman. Something under my bed, mom and dad, right? I don't want to get too far out of the line of psychological thought and with my conjecturings though, but I mean a lot of this is really catchy along those lines. I mean, I was even looking into today some Aztec mythology and some stories that were really that are folk stories in Latin America that lead me to also believe that it's linked to this idea, and not just idea, the actual occurrence that this happens to individuals. But anyways, continuing forward, the night hag is a general name for, and we're going to get into the folklore now on this, okay? The night hag is a general name for a folkloric creature found in cultures around the world and which is used to explain the phenomenon of sleep paralysis. And let's see, a common description is that a person, making sure that I read all these footnotes. Okay. A common description is that a person feels a presence of a supernatural, malevolent being which immobilizes the person as if standing on the chest. This phenomenon goes by many names. In Cambodia, they believe that they have the same type of situation. It's a collective unconscious situation is what this is proving. Obviously, it's everywhere, right? They believe that it's a dangerous it's a dangerous visitation from a deceased relative. In Egypt, sleep paralysis is conceptualized as a terrifying jinn attack. Jinn, that's an Arabic idea, okay? In southern Italy, sleep paralysis is usually explained with the presence of a sprite standing on the person's chest. If the person manages to catch the sprite or steal his hat in exchange for his freedom or to have his hat back, he can reveal the hiding place of a rich treasure. And I put a star on this, right? This reveals the same type of motif that is in the myth of the hero who slays the dragon and takes its concealed and guarded treasures. It more closely links to the Egyptian Arabic jinn or genie, which even Westerners know of well through many tales, most notably the Aladdin series. And once again, too, look at this, okay? That the genie is in this brass or golden lantern, right? Sealed up inside of it. Somebody comes around, rubs it, and out comes the genie offering you some wishes, right? Solomon was said to have banished a certain amount of spirits. I think it was 72 Goetic spirits into these vessels, these brass vessels, desire now. When we're talking about brass alchemically, we're talking about desire. He sealed them up in these vessels, so it's an alchemical idea of repression, right? That's what that's pointing back to. And these spirits or jinn, if you will, they correspond to, as 72, they correspond to the deacons within the zodiacal system. They correspond to a 360 degree circle. They correspond to the different times of the year. You know what I mean? This is in what they call the Goetia, and also in the idea of the Shem Ham Farash, which is the 72 names of God. Something to think about. All right. So meaning, it could be a spirit that is, or an entity, or an energy, a daemon that is particular to you. But also, too, I believe also, too, that these daemons have a life of their own. The unconscious is both inside and outside. All right. So anyways, let's continue. In Newfoundland, sleep paralysis is referred to as the old hag. Victims report being completely conscious but unable to speak or move, and report a person or animal which sits upon their chest. Cures or preventions for the old hag include sleeping with a Bible under the pillow. The old hag is well enough known in the province to be a pop culture figure, appearing in films and plays as well as in crafted objects. In Nigeria, there are a myriad of interpretations of the cause of sleep paralysis, quote unquote. This is due to the very diverse culture and belief systems that exist there. In the United States now, they noted, and this information that I got from Wiki right here on this one, with some of my notes added to it. Sleep paralysis is sometimes interpreted as space alien abductions in the United States. So they're attributing alien abductions to this type of situation, which very well could be true. I mean, what I went through personally felt like I was being visited by something otherworldly, you know, and we could put it off on space, but space is the alter image of the unconscious, or the great mother, you know, and the unconscious is the great mother within all of us, space within all of us, you see, space that we are unaware of to a great extent, that we have to dig deep down into to get some understanding of. Okay, so we are going to continue now. I wrote this portion here to kind of fill in a little bit more on what we've been reading, and we are nearing the end of this. Last thing we'll be getting into, and this is going to open it up, is talking about the magnet of the wise, the prima materia, which the shadow is synonymous with. And to understand, I'm gonna read the margin, and you might be able to get a greater understanding of why I'm accessing this idea of the magnet of the wise, but it should be amply understood by the time I get done reading it, though. Okay, so magnet of the wise, this is my intro to why I'm doing this here on the magnet of the wise. Magnet of the wise is referenced due to the idea that the magnet is both linked to the fish, which can be a chaotic symbol, as in the story of Jonah, and also is the symbol of the Savior, who makes fishers of men, and who is a symbol of the libido as fire, sun, etc. It shows that the aqua permanens has a fiery aspect to it, as does the Holy Spirit. The rebirth comes through proper position and right mind towards the shadow aspects. For example, canalization being a great method of that, right? Once the oppositeness is dealt with in the shadow and rectified, once our moral ideas and our idea of morality in our psyche is made healthy, and our judgments of others is relaxed, then we can begin to see desire in a new light and match it with calling, because there will be a true moral compass put in place, the true will. And in place of judgment, there will be allowing others' wills for their life, as long as it does not impede those of others. For those who have had the shadow entity experience, I believe that it is a gift. It is a visible introduction to the prima materia, and the astounding yet fearsome experience fills you with the idea that there is something other to this side of life, you know, this conscious side of waking life. There's something other than this, right? But truthfully, this experience seems to be happening outside of you, but it is really simultaneously happening within you and with outside of you, right? For the unconscious is within and also lies outside of you, veiled in physical forms. The acquaintance with this entity, having seen it, is only the beginning, and actually lays out a symbolic platform for you. And I wrote a quick note on that. Where do I get that idea? A Sufi told me, which is a particular Muslim sect, but these are like more mystics. These guys are mystics, you know, they have a mystical understanding of what it is that their belief is. A Sufi told me this long ago, and in reference to the section I read on conscience, A root leading to that word explains how when we repress the language of the conscience, how we create or can create the shadow or a nightmare that will visually show us what needs balancing. The root has the idea of the platform laid out that sets a path for the way, yet it comes initially as a seeming ambush, and that is the root Zepha. Okay, and I'll be putting that up on the screen as well. For the rest of, so it sets out a platform for you for the rest of your life based upon the nature of the visit. Charting the emotions, both positive and negative, evoked by the nature of the visitation is one way to uncover what the meaning of that visitation in your life means. I will place a picture up of mine to show you in what format and fashion this analysis of the visitation incident can be done for those that have experienced it. So now we're going to get straight into the portion of the magnet of the wise. All right. So the magnet of the wise, which is to draw the wonder-working fish to the surface of our text, says can be taught. All right. So I'm going to read this little side note, and then we're going to get into the secret teaching of the prima materia. This last read is provisional with a very important message at the end as to the multiple names of the prima materia, which reveals itself through magnetism. For example, the infernal fire is nothing other than the Deus Absconditus, the hidden God who dwells at the North Pole and reveals himself through magnetism. He calls his name Mercurius, who guides men on their perilous voyage over the sea of the world. Mercurius is this prima materia, the author and finisher of the work of individuation and initiation. This is why it is reasonable to think that the shadow spirit, even in its dark form and aspect, as it is archetypal, is an image of the divine self, which should cause us to earnestly investigate it and take its apparition seriously. Now, reading on the secret teaching of this, the content of this secret teaching is the real arcanum of alchemy, the discovery or production of the prima materia. All right. Mercurius is sometimes a substance, sometimes a philosophy. The doctrine or theory is personified, or rather concretized, as Mercurius non vulgi. So the Mercury, not the vulgar Mercury, not the metal. We're talking about the deity. All right. The philosophical Mercury. This conception is as ambiguous as the antique Hermes. Sometimes Mercurius is a substance like Quicksilver. Sometimes it is a philosophy. All right. Concerning the prima materia, the adepts talk a great deal about it, but say very little. So little that in most cases one can form no conception of it whatever. This attitude is proof of serious intellectual difficulties, understandably so, because in the first place, no such material existed from which the lapis, which is the stone, all right, the stone of the philosophers, could be prepared. Nor did anyone ever succeed in making a lapis that would have come up to expectations, because people were, when they were making the philosopher's stone, a lot of people were making the philosopher's stone of the vulgar philosopher's stone. They were trying to make it a physical thing when it's a spiritual thing. So we're going to get into the understanding of what this is, all right? And this is really eye-opening. Secondly, the names given to the prima materia show that it was not a definite substance at all, but rather an intuitive concept for an initial psychic situation symbolized by such terms as water of life, cloud, heaven, shadow, sea, mother, moon, dragon, Venus, chaos, massa confusa, confused mass. Okay, like the way that those shadow spirits look, microcosmos, a miniature of the cosmos, the macrocosm, if you will, etc. So now that we're at the end of this lecture here, what I'm going to do, and we're at an hour and 44 minutes, and I hope you've been enriched by basically what's been written down here, especially if you've been through the experience, because it's really a wonderful experience. As terrifying as it could be, it's a wonderful experience that can happen to you. So I will end this piece by telling you about my visitation and what it has meant for my life, and will also demonstrate to you how the platform it sets in front of you is concurrent. It's something that continues through your life and is a sign to you that is ever occurring, meaning its message fulfills itself on several levels of your life, and you can use this message received in order to see ahead some of the curves you will face in your life. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about the personal experience that I had. Okay, this situation happened around the time when I was about, I would say I was about 15, 16 years old, right? I was living with my dad in Lake Elsinore, California, all right? And I remember the night that I went to sleep and I had this first situation happen to me. I'm laying down and I had this, I could basically, you can see your window, the silhouette of your body, your feet, right? My window was open. It was twilight hours, so you kind of see the bluish haze because the sun was, like, I guess partially coming up, right? But I noticed the window was cracked, so I felt somebody was in the room with me. I closed that window. I always closed that window before I went to sleep. So what ended up happening was, when I knew that window was open, I felt a presence, like somebody's in this house. So I tried to move and I was stuck. Couldn't move at all. As I was stuck and I couldn't move, I looked to my upper left because that was the open area of the bed. My bed was up against the wall, right? That was the open area of the floor right there. And I saw this tall being that was made out of shadow. It was like completely made out of shadow, totally, 100%. And the eyes look like blood that's glistening in the light, like if you were to cut yourself and look at it under, like, the light of the twilight, if you will, right? And I tried to get up and move to attack this thing or to run or to do something, and I was just stuck. And I remember I was cursing. I was like, fuck, like, oh my God, like, and I felt, as I was cursing, the more I was cursing, the more I felt a hand on my throat. I felt hands all over my body pushing me into the bed. It was this, like, it was the scariest situation I'd ever been in my life. All right. I tried to reach for, I had a 25 automatic pistol under my mattress. I was like, I'm gonna put holes in this thing. I couldn't do anything. I was totally helpless. So the only thing that made the spirit go away, the spiritual entity, we can call it, right, was pronouncing the name of Jesus. Am I Christian? No, but in my psyche, having a Western psyche, I believed in the name of Jesus. That's what I grew up on in the church when I was younger. So that was the only name I knew to call on, and because I believed in it, it dissipated the whole situation. All right. Now, let me see if that's all I want to say about that time that happened. Okay, so I go to school that morning, and people just noticed something's different about me. I couldn't believe what I saw. I couldn't believe that it happened. And also, too, yeah, there is something I want to say. When he was pushing me down, he was saying, he'll never take you. He'll never take you, in this real deep, dark voice, And that was my initial experience with the transpersonal. And it always, like, at the outset of this lecture, it always comes the on the outset, meeting with the transpersonal, having an encounter, a consciously aware encounter, is always dark, and it's always grim, and it's always dim, and it's always scary, right? So I went to school, like I said, the next day, and I was just a different person after that. Totally different person, and it kind of laid out the platforms of what was going to happen for me for most of the rest of my life. I had at that point in my life and point in time, I had a rocky relationship with my father, and really with all patriarchal groups and situations. Thus, the he'll never take you. You know, there was a meaning to what it said. There was a meaning to the repression, the pushing down. There was a meaning to these things. You know what I'm saying? And it was something that put out a platform for the rest of my life because of a lot of things that I got into, and a lot of things that I ended up seeing over the course of the type of life that I lived. And this kind of gets into a personal side of life, but which is no longer a factor because through these studies and through really walking through and working through these studies, my life has totally changed around. But used to be a member of a very, very reputable gang, and have been through a lot of very, very negative things that I saw that were all just a reflection of the tyranny of the shadow in my life, and the misunderstanding of the blessing, that understanding that entity, what it could be. Okay, now I'm gonna kind of fast forward to the opposite entity. Okay, and before I get into the opposite entity situation, now what happened was there was an integration period that happened with me, and it was one day, or one early morning. Actually, it was early morning. It was a little bit later than the last visitation time that happened with me, but I saw like 4, maybe 5 of these things at the end of my bed. Happened years ago, and I felt afraid. I felt the pushing down sensation. At that point in my life, I just seen so many different things, been through so many different things, that I couldn't allow myself to be as scared at the appearance as I used to be. And I just simply spoke to it, and I said, you know, I accept you into my life, and not as a master over my life, but as somebody that, or as something that is like a co-equal, like a companion, like a friend. But do know that I'm in control. I'm in control, you know? But even being in control, I accept you. And they shrunk into the bed. It looked like one of them shrunk into my leg, the other one shrunk into my foot. And after that situation had happened, I never had that dark shadow experience, entity. Never had that happen again. Never happened again. But I've always felt the presence of that being with me when something crazy was about to happen. It was almost as something that led to intuition for me. You know what I mean? And I know what the feeling is associated with when I feel that the presence of that spirit. A lot of times too, believe it or not, I'm not sitting here blowing steam to you know, impress anybody, right? But something that I also noticed that had happened after that situation had happened was that a lot of times I'll go to cash registers, and the person that's at the cash register, the attendant, their cash register will break down. The electronic equipment will totally go down. I've had it happen several times, too many times, often than not in my lifetime, within short periods of time, to kind of know that it's like, okay, there's some type of interference, energetic interference is going on, you know, within my body, and it's kind of like its own I want to say coincidence, but it's more of a meaningful kind of coincidence. It's a synchronicity more than anything else that this really happened. It's a real situation, dude. Like, there's, you know, continuously I am letting known that you went through this, dude. You know, so anyways, now to get to the flip side situation, after having, you know, done a conscious visual integration of that and accepting it. You know, around that time, I wasn't as consciously aware as I am now. But there was a time that I was going through a really, really bad depression, soul libido regression, more of a possibility, heightened possibility to receive guidance and be shown something that is could be a visual hallucination, but that is tailored to you. That's gonna show you something that gives you yourself back, a large part of yourself back, because you're lost at that time and you can't find yourself. You're in the fog. But anyways, I actually did a pretty decent shroom trip on this one, okay? I want to talk about at some later date entheogens and how to approach entheogens. Shortly after that period of taking the entheogens, like where I just had stepped back and was going through a large depression, I ended up coming out of the depression. I learned how to actually elicit the experience of being on entheogens and the enlightenment, the impulses of enlightenment that you get from being on entheogens. I've learned how to do that without actually having to use them, which is to me it still blows my mind that I'm able to elicit that response within myself and be sitting right in front of you and just, you know, be somewhere else, be in a realm of peace and happiness and receiving spiritual knowledge. I could just go there. But anyways, so during this one shroom episode, right, I was really kind of sad that day because I was having a little bit of an issue with my lady, and my son. My heart was feeling like for my son, like really like kind of bad about the situations, everything that was going on. So I took my son, and this kind of getting intimate because I've never really told anybody this, but I took my son, I put him on my chest. There were a lot of mosquitoes in this one place that we were in. They were flying around everywhere, man. And I thought to myself, I don't want my son getting bit by these mosquitoes and possibly get, malaria or whatever else could ensue by him getting bit by these things. So I put my own leg out, wrapped him up in the sheet, and I put the sheet top on my head, and it was weird because during that shroom trip I felt you guys are all gonna laugh because I don't, but I gotta tell you, I felt like I became like the presence of the Virgin Mary. Very strange. Mushrooms will open up different things to you, right? But I felt that presence, and that's when it appeared to me. I saw a fire, a big flame in the middle of the living room, and it had all manners of creation inside of it. It reminded me of the hood of Sesanaga, and that's in the Bhagavad Gita, right? It looked like the hood of Sesanaga. Sesanaga's hood has all the worlds, all the planets, and creational spheres inside of his hood. Is a cobra, right? But it was a flame, the shape of that shadow spirit, but it was like a flame because it was light, radiating with light. And it was showing me all these manners of creations, like cities and people and different things inside of it. And it says this same light, this same fire is the fire and the light and the energy that raised Christ from the dead. This same energy is the energy that is within you. This energy is the same energy that is holding all things together. And without this energy, nothing was made that was made. It was telling me things that were so scriptural and so that were part of real true doctrine. And I felt peace. I felt empowerment. I felt that it was the exact opposite, the mirror opposite of that entity, that shadow entity, even though I had made a peace with that entity, So, long story short, that situation happened, and I realized when I sat down and actually did a comparison of both of the feelings and the words that I got from the entities, the feelings, the emotions that I got from both of the entities, I realized that they were complementary. In their oppositeness, they were complementary, because I could look and say, oh, there's times when I feel pushed down, repressed, where I feel the patriarchy won't accept me, and as far as the platform's concerned, I've been kicked out and excommunicated at a church. I've always had problems with authority figures, and without even getting all the way into it, I've always had those problems, and I've always been somewhat of a individual that has his own mind state, that has his own code that he goes by, his own law, his own idea, but as far as having the negative quote unquote side of things and then seeing the positive side of things, I looked at both of the opposites, which I suggest you do. I'll show you my work that I did on that, right? It's a drawing with both of those, the positives and then the negatives, if you will. Negative spirit, positive spirit, the aspects, and even if you've only seen the quote unquote negative shadow spirit, if you can gain some understanding of your emotions that you went through when you went through that experience, write those negative emotions down. Fear, I felt like it was, some people have felt that I've talked to about the situation, that they felt that they were molested by it, raped by it, that they were pushed down by it, choked by it, that they were dragged by it. There's a lot of different things that it does that kind of tell you something about how your life is going to be, how you're going to live your life, for better or for worse. You know what I mean? It's better to go with it, because that's the whole idea with the Daemon, is it's better to go with that energy and with that platform that it's laying down, because it's archetypal, meaning it has force, patterning force on your life. It's better to go with it than to go against it, because you're going to be the dunce in the long run. It's going to drag you through the mud. You're going to have a hard life if you don't align yourself and really understand that blessing to have had that experience, and do the work to see it. So anyways, for instance, I'm going to give you a for instance or two, with the repressive aspect. Okay. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt. I've cage fought. I have a cage fight coming up. That's something that I do. That's something that makes me feel alive. Most people be like, dude, you feel alive by putting yourself in risk of great bodily injury. I compete doing this type of stuff. But really, when it gets down to the bottom of it, that repression, that being pushed down into the floor, the heaviness of weight, right? I felt powerless. I felt I was unable to do anything, right? Only in the name of Jesus opened it up and released and allowed me to wake up. Now, jiu-jitsu has a lot of those aspects of repression, being pushed down, weighted down, not being able to move, having to find your way out of certain positions and situations and stopping the threat. You know what I mean? So it's all, I could say it's part of my makeup. It's part of my being to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've been doing it up until this date since 2010. So it's something that completes me. It's a form of canalizing that energy, that rampant energy. Like if I didn't have Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I probably would be more prone to certain outbursts of anger, or maybe more proactive when it comes to perceived threats or perceived slights against me. You know what I mean? I'd be a little bit more aggressive. You know what I mean? So it's a way to canalize that energy that is, some might say, oh, that's terrible. Well, maybe to you it is, but maybe there's some things that your situation represents that are terrible to others. We got to find a way to canalize it. We have to find a way to channel it. We have to find a way to take that free-flowing libido that's like water and put it in a river and let it run its course and flow into what it needs to, so that it can have its free range of motion, So anyways, the more positive aspect inside, the more life-giving aspect inside, I believe is, it had set out a platform for me also to do, for instance, what I'm doing now. What I'm doing now is to give life to certain things that people have been through, to give them understanding of how they can utilize that to actually have a more abundant life. You see, and not abundant, I'm not saying within the range of monetary, within the range of the true riches, the true gold, the gold that the true alchemists were trying to cultivate, which was that of the spirit. You see, and that to me is a driving force. It's something that is it's a passion for me. I get such a sense of fulfillment of from putting videos, for instance, like this out, that maybe if it's just one or two people that get something from it, hey, my work is done. You know, if at some point, sometime within the life of thinking in circles, that some of these videos get 2.5k views, 1 million views, great. If I become a worldwide, nationally known speaker, which could very well happen. You know, I gotta learn to stop saying all the time though. But no, I have a message. I have a purpose. You know, and that's what I want to convey to individuals, that you have a purpose. You have a specific message, and the Daemon is this being that, whether you know it or not, you have one. Some would say that some people's daemons, tutelary spirits, if you will, spirits of tutelage, are of lesser import, of greater import. Who could say that? Some people would say that because some have led certain people to fame within the right amount of time of their life. Some have only led certain people into certain varying degrees of knowledge or wisdom, you know what I mean? But I think at the end of the day, whatever you can gain from the Daemon and from the power and the hold that it has on your life, in a good way. And I'm not saying like you're in the clutches of the devil. Please divorce yourself from that. Hopefully by this time you have, by understanding that I'm talking about something psychologic, right? And something also spirituality and psychology and also sexuality go hand in hand, you know? But the Daemon is something that I really hope after this lecture, which I am now on the verge of closing, and I hope you've gained something from me, having put up the pictures on how to start off with charting your experience, you know, and I hope you've gained something from this because it's something that has shown me so much about myself, which I've only given you the tip of the iceberg, you know. And if I continued on the subject, we'd probably be sitting here 3 hours. And you know, first and foremost, I apologize for a 2-hour video. Thank you for taking your time to listen. I hope you've gained something that will enrich you and will increase your focus on the inner plane, so that you can live a greater, more fulfilling, more purpose-driven, more clear-cut and determined life ahead, you know. So I'm just gonna end it in this lecture series at this point on that note, and I hope to see you guys again. And once again too, if you haven't liked the videos, like them please. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Share them if you wish to share them, and also to continue to keep a continuing lookout for the videos that I'm creating on the tarot series. We have quite a few more to go through. I'm going to finish the Major Arcana series and continue into the Lesser Arcana series, and within the tarot, all 78 cards, and just flesh them out within a 60-second time limit. And at a later date, what I project to do is to have some really in-depth, more drawn-out discussions on the tarot as well, though, too, with all the cards included, you know, and kind of guide you guys through an understanding of the deep and rich symbolism that is within the set of the tarot. So Without further ado, thank you. Have a good day, night, morning, wherever in the world you may be, and thank you for listening.